populated by party bureaucrats, the lower ranks by people who worked and had no influence over the process of production and political decision-making.
In 1934, when Mao Zedong began his long march that was to lead to the Chinese Revolution, he also believed that social classes would disappear by themselves after a period called the dictatorship of the proletariat. In fact, in China, as in Russia, new social classes appeared. The former ruling classes were replaced by Communist Party officials and bureaucrats. In Europe and North America, the 40s, 50s, and 60s were marked by great working class struggles. After winning the 8-hour day, unions demanded higher pay and better social benefits. Workers' parties fought for universal social programs for health and income security. Their economic importance and political influence paid off. Workers' living conditions improved.
I have a dream.
In the United States, the Black Civil Rights Movement and the fight for women's rights stemmed directly from the battles of the labor movement. During the 20th century, the conflicts that divided society resulted in more and more rights for all citizens. Today, in spite of all its efforts, humanity still has not managed to eradicate social inequality. Throughout the world, class determines the structure of society. But how individuals within a given class are viewed varies from one culture to another. In India, the government banned the caste system when the country became independent in 1947. In theory, all Indians have the same rights. In practice, the caste system still molds the social classes.
At the top, we've got Brahmins. Below, we've got Kshatriyas, Vaisyas, and Sudras, which are the names of traditional occupations held by the peoples, the warriors, the merchants, and the workers. However, in the process of historical change, of course, those major castes started to include all sorts of occupational positions. They had very little to do with occupational stratification. But nevertheless, the very fact that castes were recognized and traditionally sanctioned by religion, by Hinduism. The principle for Hindu is to respect caste divisions. And the very fact that marriages in India were influenced by caste position, you were supposed to marry within the caste, made caste a persistent form of stratification even when India started to industrialize.
The caste system is a powerful impediment to social mobility. The fate of the untouchables excluded from the caste system is particularly harsh. They are relegated to the most unrewarding jobs and are constantly victims of discrimination.
It seems to me that the principle of caste stratification in India and in societies derived from Indian society is likely to persist for many generations. The reason for its persistence is that it is deeply ingrained in Indian religious belief, in Hinduism, and therefore is carried together with religious beliefs through generations.
Western societies allow more movement between the different layers of the population than a country like India. But elites continue to flourish. In France, bourgeois status no longer depends only on family money or advantageous marriages, but on access to highly responsible jobs. These jobs are reserved for a small elite made up of people who studied at the great schools. Their graduates make the important economic and political decisions for the country. Despite the growing standardization of lifestyles, differences between classes persist. In Great Britain, these are perceptible in details almost too subtle for foreigners to understand. Vocabulary, or even the way people take tea.
I think England is one of the countries where social class divisions are most obvious. This is becoming less true, but it's still the case that regional accents, for example, distinguish people, and that you can tell very quickly the Oxford and Cambridge educated elites from the working classes. It's still the case that the dress styles and personal habits vary with social class, and that these have large consequences for people's economic well-being in the society.
Throughout Europe, the traces of working people's struggles remain. The power of socialist parties in France and in England stemmed directly from the working class tradition. In the United States, no labor movement has ever produced a party popular enough to take power and govern the country.
Classes never became a social formation in North America. It was a very European social form. For a short time, American society did develop strong stratification along the lines of property and occupational position, but the major stultifying factors was, first, the importance of race. In North America, in the USA in particular, race overshadowed class. Therefore, social identities and social inequalities were principally determined by race.
Despite their differences, all Western societies have one thing in common. They have bred a new social class, the class of the excluded, the chronically unemployed.
The excluded today are people whose poverty serves no purpose. If you will, people in the working class feel they are poor and their poverty is making wealth for other people. Society is rich because I am poor. Today, the poverty of those excluded from our societies does not contribute at all to our wealth.
The thousands of unemployed in Western societies have no social clout. These new poor have nothing in common but their exclusion from the system. They have little or no power to protest.
In contrast, the poverty of the women who make luxury clothing in the workshops of Latin America is useful. There, we find a class awareness in the labor movement similar to what we saw in the last century.
Class is associated with a very specific form of industrialization, which was first started in Europe during the Industrial Revolution and later diffused throughout the world. Countries which are undergoing industrialization process do have class divisions and class conflict. And these class divisions and class conflicts are replacing the older form of estate divisions, of pre-industrial social divisions and conflicts which existed before they started to enter the path of industrialization.
In several parts of the world, a deep gap still separates the working classes from the governing classes. These are the regions where the social and economic conditions are such that the working classes could revolt. It has been several decades now since a person's future was dictated merely by the milieu into which he was born. We have a certain social mobility.